Hi everyone, welcome to video 2 of the second unit. Alright, so we just got done talking about epithelial tissues and its functions. So we want to look at, well, how do we know where epithelial tissue ends? Okay, so what we're going to look at is the boundaries of epithelial tissue. Okay, so let's just look at the skin. So here's my skin. Boom. We know that we have a bunch of layers of skin, or a bunch of layers of stratified squamous, so let's build up a couple layers. Okay, and we can also look at a single cell when we talk about these boundaries. So if you look at this top layer is called the apical layer. Okay, this bottom layer is called the basal layer, basal surface. So we have an apical surface and a basal surface. We also have a basal layer and an apical layer. So this top layer versus this bottom layer, or the bottom part of the cell, the basal layer versus the top. And really, how do you know what's bottom, what's top? Well, apical means it's exposed to the air or a free surface. So free surface, we're typically talking about air. There's nothing above it, right? Free surface. The basal layer, it's the attached surface, so it's connected to something. Typically, this basal layer is going to attach the epithelial tissue to connective tissue. So basal is the connective layer, and it's typically, sorry for my handwriting, and it's typically connecting epithelial to connective. So this is what we're looking at when we're looking at boundaries of epithelial tissue. Where does it start? Where does it stop? We have the apical layer and the basal layer. Apical, surface of a cell. Basal, surface of a cell. Let's see. So the word surface is used whenever we refer to simple or single cells. So this is, again, an apical surface. And then the word layer refers to stratified cells. So this is the basal layer and the apical layer. Now we're looking at the basal membrane. So we're going to be looking at this basal surface of basal layer of epithelial tissue. So let's draw the basement membrane. Let me draw and then we'll write. Alright, so remember, we're looking at this basement membrane, which is on the basal layer of epithelial tissue. So if you're looking at stratified, it's this very bottom layer. Right underneath that epithelial tissue, you have the basement membrane, which is what we're talking about right now. So this first thing is the basal lamina, okay? So this basal lamina is really close to the basal layer of the epithelial tissue. So basal lamina, this is a non-cellular sheet of glycoprotein. And I did it in purple because if you watched last unit's video, whenever I talked about proteins, I tried to do them in purple. So there's certain things like carbs I try to do in green. Fibers like collagen and stuff I'll do in pink. So I try to keep colors the same, so as you're taking these tests you can think about these colors in these pictures. So what we're looking at is the basal lamina, and remember, non-cellular sheet of glycoprotein. How do you know it's non-cellular? Because if you remember, glycoproteins are those components of the plasma membrane. So they're not cells themselves, they're just little extensions off the plasma membrane. So we talked about glycoproteins being receptors, acting as receptor sites. Let's see what they do here. So non-cellular sheet of glycoprotein. And then the reticular lamina is going to be like mostly collagen fibers. So collagen fibers. So let's think of this. I wish you could see my fingers, but go ahead and point your fingers in like as if you're holding up the number 4 and turn it straight down so your fingers are pointing toward the 4 and wiggle them back and forth. I want you to think of the very end of your palm, which is, right by your fingers. Think of that as your plasma membrane, and then you have these extensions of glycoproteins. All right, now run your other hand perpendicular to that, or 90 degrees in that, and then interweave your fingers. And this is kind of what you have. You have this mesh, so let me just draw, since you can't see my face. So if I have this, let's just say this is my basal layer, and now I want to draw the basal lamina, so I'm going to draw these extensions of glycoprotein. So this was my fingers pointing in this direction like that. and then I had collagen fibers, which was my other hand, and I had it running like this. So what this is doing, this is making like an interlocked web to help connect whatever's up here, which is your epithelial tissue, and whatever's down here, which is your connective tissue. So the connection between the epithelial and epithelial layer and the connective layer is this basal membrane, and we saw this right here. We said the basal surface typically is the connective layer, and typically we're talking about epithelial to connective tissues. So, okay, cool. So those collagen fibers, those are going to add strength and integrity to the basal membrane so that, let's say that you get a little force over here, it's not going to rip the whole layer of epithelial tissue off because you have this reinforcement of the glycoproteins and the collagen fibers interacting. Remember, glycoproteins, whenever we think of glyco, we think of sugars and carbohydrates. They're sticky, right? So we have these sticky extensions with this integrity strength collagen fibers. So this is what's connecting, once again, your epithelial layers and your connective tissue layers. So glycoproteins and collagen work together to connect these two layers. The basal membrane keeps the epithelial tissue anchored. If not, then your skin would literally slough off. It'd just fall right off. So why else is this important? We need this intact connection because epithelial tissue is what we call avascular. So let's do some root words. So avascular. So vascular, let's say a human, you might see a weightlifter with all his veins sticking out, and you say, man, that guy is very vascular. So we're just thinking blood when we're thinking of vascular. That root means no or not or against. So what this is saying no blood. So if epithelial tissue is avascular, then it doesn't have a blood connection supply. But if you remember, every cell needs to be able to exchange with the circulatory system because that's to take in nutrients and get rid of waste. There's always that balance to stay in homeostasis of taking in nutrients to build up your cell and getting rid of waste so that you don't break down your cell. So this is what the basal membrane does. So if I have my blood vessels down here in the connective tissue, here's all my blood vessels running, I need a way to get this nutrients up here into my epithelial layer, and that's what this basal membrane provides. It provides a way to keep these tissues intact to allow for this exchange to occur. Sweet. So that's the basal membrane.